Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming over here. We have gathered for the Research Forum Masterclass 3 on the subject of design education and doctoral pathways in the digital age by Professor Sangeeta Shroff. Speaking about her, Professor Sangeeta Shroff is the head of the Institute of Design at Nirma University, Ahmedabad, and alumna of NID Ahmedabad and UNDP fellow. She specializes in visual communication and exhibition design. With over 35 years of experience, she has worked across design, education, research, and practice, spanning communication, space design, crafts, fashion interiors, and more. She has held key positions at NIFT and IICD Jaipur and collaborated with industry, government bodies, and NGOs. Professor Shroff has played a pivotal role in curriculum development and faculty training in leading design institutions. Her interdisciplinary approach and deep engagement with grassroots and cultural contexts make her a valued mentor and thought leader in the design community. I would like to welcome Professor Shroff, and on behalf of an AMA, I would like to facilitate her.
Okay. So my brief today. So a little bit about myself is I'm currently at Nirma University. I look after the Institute of Design there. I'm the dean and the director. I'm myself not a doctorate. I don't have a doctoral degree, but I've been working in this field now for 45 years. So I have definitely something to say about research. This talk is not going to be so much about design as much as about research, right? So the brief that Ahmedabad Management Association gave me was about design education and doctoral pathways in the digital age. So I've added from practice to publication, frameworks, methods, and pathways for scholarly contribution. So just to give you a background, design as a profession is a practice-based profession. Meaning all professions are practice-based, but design's focus has been practice and delivery, right? And therefore, when the design institutes were set up in India, they were not under Ministry of Education, they were under Ministry of Commerce or Ministry of Industry. They were not under also Ministry of HRD. Because the whole concept was that you're preparing professionals ready for industry who would help the new nation's production and build a whole a design, production, service industry kind of a background. So it was one of, by nature, design is an output-based profession. In the sense, there are professions where you take in inputs and your outputs are more in terms of verbal outputs, they are outputs in terms of theory. But design is a profession where there is an output. There is an artifact, there is a product, there is a system that you design, there's a space that you create. So a lot of the work is to do with innovating and to work towards a problem redressal. That there is a existing problem which is there in a tool, in a artifact, in a space, and you're supposed to address the needs of the people. So there is extensive research that designers do. Designers do tremendous amount of research. They do research into use, they do research into the user group, they do research into the artifact in use, the context of use, the economics of use, and they would also look at the supply chain and the value chain. So there is tremendous amount of research which is done by designers, but there is no articulation of the research. There is no scholarly output of the research. Have you seen a textbook of design? Meaning there'll be a textbook of history, there'll be a textbook of mathematics, there'll be a textbook of civil engineering, but there'll be no textbook of design. There'll be many books on design. There'll be many books on the methodology of design. There'll be many books on the creative process of design. There'll be many books on materials and processes that are the way the designers would use these processes. There would be many books on communication theories, but there'll never be a textbook. So the sector and the profession took very conscious decision not to make a textbook, because the world is constantly changing. Technology is constantly changing. Materials are constantly changing. So you have to be abreast with what is there. So therefore, your knowledge will come from the field, from the practice, or it will come from seminal books or theories which are written. So this presentation, we are going to look at what are the strategic approaches for doctoral research. So my presentation is about doctoral research because that was the brief that I've been given. So because we are a practice-based profession, there's so much new knowledge which is generated in practice. For example, if an architect gets a brief that you need to make a building with cement concrete, but you have to ensure that the temperature inside is minimum 5 degrees less. So there's a lot of experimentation that would happen. There would be a lot of theoretical studies that would be done. There'll be a lot of trial and error which would be done. But all that is never documented. It remains with that design studio or with that practice which is there or with that industry. So what we are proposing as is that we have to frame design practice as a rigorous doctoral research, right? There is material. There's tremendous amount of content, new content which is there, which has the potential to become scholarly output or research output. Leveraging cross-disciplinary research methods and ensuring validity. A little more about it I'll say later, but if we look at all the disciplines which are there, we have management, we have science, we have technology, we have the fine arts, we have the plastic arts, we have the humanities. Each has its own specificity. Design has borrowed from each of these disciplines. So design will have to look at psychology. They will have to bring in a psychology or a sociological point of view. They would have to look at an anthropological or a historical view. They would need to understand materials and processes. They will need to understand a value chain. So therefore, design is this funny profession which has borrowed things from each other discipline which is there. So it's really a cross-disciplinary activity. And I think that is what brings the richness to the profession. Understanding research through design and its speculative exemplars. Many people use design and artifacts to do research on something else. For example, you want to study if people have sleep disorders, what do they do to understand sleep disorders? So they would use an artifact, they would use a communication system to understand these things. So sometimes research is also done through design elements, a larger research about socio-cultural, socio-political habits or even biomedical contexts are also studied through objects, through communication systems. Then publication through patents and case studies, and this is something which is a tremendous potential area for design, not really explored much in India. Like now, industries have been have been doing their patents, but design studios have not been making patents. It's only in the last 10 or 15 years that we are seeing design studios uh, registering their patents, defending their patents, and eventually publishing their patents. If we look at management education, I would imagine that one important methodology to study of study in management is through the case or through case studies. There are hardly any cases of design written in India, when there are so many potential design cases. I just give you a simple example. One big entrepreneurial venture of Ahmedabad is our Symphony air coolers, right? Meaning, here was a product to bring comfort to middle class families. So you had an air cooler, and then it was it was made compact because homes became compact, and people also had an aspirational value. So you also made it like an air conditioner, right? So it looked like an air conditioner. It had certain functional properties. The company over the last 30, 40 years have made so many uh, iterations, many variations, many offerings which are there. But is there a case written on Symphony coolers? I don't think so it exists. And it could be such an interesting case because you look at business, you look at market segmentation and changing the market, you would look at rationalization of resources, we would look at design features, but nobody's written the case. Neither the people who built the brand nor the designers who helped build the brand. So there are in India so many potential cases of design that can be written. So that's an important area. So patents and cases are something that is a possibility. And then strategies for building a robust research ecosystem within design institutions. Please feel free to interrupt at any point. So what I'm proposing is that if we want to build a research climate in design, then what are all the things in design or what designers do which has the potential to become, could lead to scholarship. So one is, one of the key capabilities which are taught to designers is observation. Because through observation, you build some great insights. In marketing, there is a very simple and a very interesting way that when they go to do a census and when they are looking at economic markers, and when you do a survey and you say कि आपकी तनख्वाह कितनी है, आपके घर में कितना पैसा, कितने लोग क्या कमाते हैं, we never tell the truth. Either we hike it up or we say, अगर हमारे स्टूडेंट्स जितने भी फॉर्म भरते हैं ना, सबके घर में आमदनी 4 लाख की है, लेकिन वो पढ़ने जाते हैं अमेरिका, कहाँ से वो 50 लाख या 1 करोड़ आता है, मुझे नहीं समझ आता है. So somehow questionnaires, quantitative surveys have its own limitations, we all know that, and therefore observation or other markers become very, very important, right? So designers do a lot of observation, and there are many methods of observation which are there. One is observing if you're using an artifact, or in a home, if you live in a particular way, then you observe things. You try and understand why this is happening, because of what reason. And there are some very interesting insights which can make or break not just a product, can make or break a human being. It's very interesting. At Stanford University, a group of students had taken up a problem In Stanford University, there is a D school, and the students had taken up a problem to devise an incubating facility for little premature babies in absolute rural villages where there is no access to public health center or a hospital. So there was a primary health center, but there was no hospital which was around. So they designed one fabric crib which had they built in some solar cells into it, or they did some alternate technology use, and they made something, and it could be charged by a cell phone charger. They had worked out the thing, and it was costing, in American money, $5 was the cost of that incubating cradle. And the teacher insisted that because it's part of design, that you have to do contextual inquiry. You can't sit away in a lab and design something. So when the students went to that village in Maharashtra, they found one very interesting, they had an interesting insight, because there was a mental model in the minds of the women कि जो भी विदेशी दवा है, जो डॉक्टर एक गोली देते हैं तो हमको आधी ही खानी है. So you become your own doctors. So they got very worried that if our crib says that the temperature should be 30 degrees and these women will only do it till 15 degrees, then the premature baby will die. So then they changed the numerical count on the crib to color, that when it reaches the correct temperature, it would become green. So then they know that now you switch off the whatever is the battery or something like that. So observation is a strength of design. And there are many multiple, because there would be something called you are shadowing somebody for 24 hours. You're seeing repeated use of something. You're seeing certain behavioral traits. You're looking at certain cultural traits. So observation in practice and the patterns which are seen, this inquiry and engagement of designers is a very interesting area of scholarship which need to be looked at, because there's certain research methods that designers bring to the field which are very important. Then there is hypothesis formation. Experimentation and prototyping is something which is a very important part of design, because you will do iterations of things several times and you will go and check it out with people. And then consolidation of all of this into a theory or a method, and then the subsequent articulation of it as a paper and dissemination. I've also tried to put what are the research paradigms in different disciplines. So in science, for scientific research, generally it happens in a controlled environment, it happens in a lab. Often it is quantitative, because you have to come out with, to understand, and so quantitative analysis becomes important. In scientific research, replicability is a very important thing, and the research output is always an article in a journal. Right? For social sciences and humanities, your work is the field. You have to go to the field and do research. The data types are mixed. You will use multiple kinds of research methods. And the validity will be triangulation. Mane, you will use quantitative, behavioral, qualitative methods to generate information. And your research can help in defining a policy, or it can go as a paper. If you're in the arts, the fine arts, the performing arts, and if there is a research to be done, your research will be practice-based, it could be field-based, it would be the artifacts, the style, the language that you have developed, the narratives you have developed. For example, if I'm a writer and if I decide that my method of writing a story is non-linear, that I don't start with the beginning and I don't end at the end, but I may begin in the middle and then go to the end and then go to the beginning later on. I might build a new structure and I might continue to write my stories in that manner. Then that may become a research subject for somebody. So, in the case of art and practice, the validity, they say, is reflexivity, which is the subjective output, and it may result in an exhibition or a paper. For technology and business, the lab, the market, that becomes the setting, the metrics, the prototypes, and most important is the reliability of your research, and the return on investment becomes a very important validification of your research, and it results in a patent or in a conference paper. Design research has Richard Frayling has come out with a very interesting 3 aspects about design research. One is research for design, second is research into design, and third is research through design. So there are 3 different ways that design research happens. Research for design is that if I want to develop a biomedical device, then I'm doing research for the design that I want to create. So that is where one would then go into all the methods that are required for it. Research into design is, as I mentioned, the case of symphony, or if we decide to take up, say, the making of the service Zomato, okay? If that is a strategy, that is an innovative strategy, it's a design of a service, then you want to understand that what went into developing that design. So that is research into design, and that research can be done by people other than designers to understand, because this comes in the realm of design thinking. These days everybody is talking of design thinking. डिज़ाइन थिंकिंग के क्लासेस बैंकिंग स्टाफ के लिए होते हैं, हॉस्पिटल स्टाफ के लिए होते हैं, डॉक्टर्स के लिए होते हैं. यू हैव डिज़ाइन थिंकिंग इनपुट्स हैपनिंग फॉर CEOs of companies, for managers of the shop floors. So design thinking as a methodology has caught on with the management fraternity, and then they have talked about it, written much about it. So research into design is, because designers and artists think thoda differently from the rest, because there's a lot of intuitive, there's a lot of subjective interpretation, and there's a lot of historical study which comes into the way designers operate. The third is research through design. Yeah, you wanted to ask something? Yes, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. One of the first elements of training that designers have is if you're going to design a space for sight challenged people, then you have to blindfold yourself and spend a day trying to do things. So you have to get into the shoes of the person for whom you are designing. So there is an empathetic journey that designers will need to do, and therefore stakeholder research becomes very important. That while design is a user focused profession, your client is not the user. Your client is the industry person. Your client is a manufacturer. Your client is the person who is marketing the product. But the center of your focus is the user. So therefore, designers also have the task of understanding everybody in the value chain too. So stakeholder research becomes very important. The third area where I'm talking of research through design is where you're taking design to understand a much larger issue. Yeah? So, for example, if one wants to know that, you know, uh, how are people going to live in the future? How are people going to eat in the future? What will be the kind of families in the future? Then, to understand a much larger phenomenon or a social pattern like that, you may take elements of design. You may take communication systems, you may take artifacts, you may take spaces to build your research experiments to understand the much larger issue. So, a lot of speculative design, that is, design for the future, is done. Like, it's very interesting. Um, there was a faculty member of NIIT uh, at Delhi. He's now become a world global figure. Uh, his school was at Kalkaji in Delhi, and next to the school was a slum. And his competency was on touch screen education, meaning self learning, and touch screens had just come into the uh, into the human day to day living, but very preliminary. So he said, if this is going to has a component of self learning, he said, can the slum children learn it? You should look at his TED talk. His name is Sugata Mitra. It's called The Cloud in the Sky, and he's now become a very world renowned person. So he made a hole in the wall. In fact, the TED talk is called The Hole in the Wall, and he fixed a touch screen there, and he left it for 3 months to see whether the slum children could teach themselves to learn, and he put some science experiments on it. So he wants to learn, he wants to do research in self learning, but he used a design device to understand a much larger aspect of self learning. So research through design implies that. You with me till now? Any questions? I can move. So, for doctoral research, for design researchers, the typical flow would be that you start with a research question, a clear researchable question that goes beyond a mere project theme. Guiding the entire inquiry is, what is it we are trying to find out? So, the research question becomes very important. Then one needs to also visualize the logical flow. So, if we have a research question, what would be the methods we would use? What would be our data collection segments and methods? What would be the data analysis tools? And then finally, what is the kind of scholarly contribution we want to make? Then it's a thesis type. So, in design, there are 3 approaches. One is practice based, which means you do something and you build your research thesis, right? So I want to make a new kind of a brick. I want to make bricks with composite materials, in which I want to mix natural materials and non-biodegradable materials, and I want to experiment. So it would become a practice-based research. You would have, so where the design artifact or a communication system is at its core, we would have a traditional theory-driven research, and then it could be applied research where you're working with industry with specific constraints, and then you're building your research. And then the dissemination can have diverse outputs. It could be peer-reviewed papers, it could be curated portfolios, it could be patent applications or policy briefs to maximize impact. Because I could do some research with my brick And I might like to present it to the government. I might want to present it to the scientific community. I might want to present it to the architectural association or to the civil engineers and architect association. So I might bring my research finding can also have 4 goals or 4 target areas and many more. So dissemination would be that. I mentioned about case studies because in India we have very few design case studies written, and there is a lot of work which is there. There's one design studio in Ahmedabad, and I was very surprised to know it's a fairly young design studio, 20 years old, and they have more than 350 patents to their name. And there's not a single case written on them. I mean, they might have articulated their projects because when they go to meet a new client, they would be showcasing all their projects. But none of these cases have come up for teaching in the classroom. And it's such brilliant output which is there that could teach design students, because we are giving them the same old cases that may have emerged from the West. Whereas the Indian context may be different, as a context in Singapore may be different, and a context in Russia may be different. So many cases will bring a contextuality to it. So in a typical case study offers a powerful qualitative approach for an in-depth understanding of complex design phenomena aligning with real-world practice. So there is a unit of analysis, there's a specific design project, which could be a product, a service, or a design process. This sets the boundaries for data collection. Then the data sources, there would be the stakeholders, there would be direct observation, there would be an analysis of the artifacts. When I say artifacts, it doesn't mean just products. It could also be the communication systems, it could be behavioral patterns, performance metrics, and usage analytics. You know, like these days when apps, you do a lot of analysis of usage analytics, because one would look at what time is the app being used, which gender is using it, which age group is using it, because there are so many methods to track it. And of course, they might build algorithms based on that. But usage analytics become very important, you know. And it could be as simple as how does the rickshaw driver indicate he wants to turn right. So you keep noticing, you observe 100 of them and you will see a pattern which might be there, or how they sit, or how they entertain themselves when they are waiting, because these become very interesting data sources for us. Analysis employ methods like thematic coding for qualitative data, performance metrics for quantitative data, and impact mapping to assess outcomes. Outcomes analytic generalization, I'm skipping over this, but case studies are the need of the hour according to me. Patents are another important part of research for design, and I would imagine for many people who do process design, you might do materials design. There might be a lot of composite people. Ahmedabad is meaning Gujarat is a place where there's a lot of innovation that happens, whether it is packaging, whether it is to do with soil use, whether it's to do with farming, whether it's to do with the kind of foods which are being created, the services which are being designed. So patents are an important route for doctoral research. So there are 3 kinds of patents. Many of you who come from industry already know about it. There are utility patents, which are new inventions or new products. There are design patents which are more to do with the form or the ornamental aspect of it, the color, the material, the texture of it. And then there is process, which is where you are developing a new process or a new technological method of making it. Patents demonstrate novelty, provide a tangible artifact for evaluation and user testing, and can frame the development process itself as research. And the methodology to do it is idea generation, prior art search, prototyping, filing the patent application, conducting an evaluation study, and publication of research findings. So I mentioned about research through design, where I gave the example of the D school student, where you're taking an artifact and you're looking at how people are going to behave. So from that I come to one area which is a very important area according to me for designers, because designers are always designing something for the now, but it has to have a bearing on the future. When I say design, I don't mean just the designer tribe. The person who designed Relief Road is also a designer, because when you design a relief road, you have to look 100 years later, how is it going to be used? What would be the pattern of usage? So we are never designing for the now. We are also designing for tomorrow. And we are learning from the past. We are projecting into the future to understand. So this is a new discipline in design called speculative design. So you're speculating in the future, not speculating just mane marji thai ki avu hovu joye, not like that. You're taking absolute, you're looking at hard facts. What are the new technologies on the horizon? Where is the world moving towards? What are geopolitical compulsions? What are socio-cultural? We all know, for example, that even if you have children, for example, you may still have to go to assisted living, because your children will no longer be living with you. They might be in America, they could be in Singapore, they could be in Kenya, they could be in South Africa, because the world has become a global marketplace. And for opportunity, people are going to move. So when a family structure changes, then designers will have to think of, if today our population dividend is young, tomorrow the geriatric group, meaning the senior citizens, is going to be a very large group. When you go to Northern European countries today, when we go to Sweden, Finland, Denmark, you hardly see youth in those countries, because they've all moved to where work is. They've all moved to emerging markets. They're not there. So how are they going to live? Dementia is a new concept on the horizon. How are we going to make homes for people who are going to have dementia, who are going to have Alzheimer's? So this comes into the field of speculative design. If in countries where people are not marrying, are not having children, or where population has gone to zero, then what is going to happen to those countries? What are those countries going to be 20 years hence? So there is an entire field of speculative design, which is designing for the future, planning for the future. For example, some of you might have heard of this author called Arthur C. Clarke. In the 1970s, he wrote about satellite communication. It was fiction at that time. And within 15 or 20 years, it became a reality. Okay. So many scientists, designers, social scientists are speculating what will be families in the future, what would be play in the future. I mean, people are playing football on the mobile phone. Could we have imagined it 20 years ago? So this is an area of speculation, that what is entertainment going to be in the future? What is education going to be in the future? Will people go to universities, or will universities come to people? Which is what happened in the pandemic. And it completely changed the way of being. So speculative futures is a very interesting area of research, according to me, and it also has a potential for a cross-disciplinary or an interdisciplinary research work, where social scientists, technologists, designers, and policymakers can sit together to project what is going to happen in future. What is going to be the future of education? What is going to be the future of food? What are we going to eat? So these are areas to look at. I'm not going into the details but speculative design is a very important area and an important area for research. With climate change, with depleting resources, and the world is moving from industrial age, we move to information age. Now we are coming to the age of assisted intelligence, assistive intelligence. With AI, we are going to be, because if you look at all inventions and innovations, they are extensions of the human body. When the cycle came, it extended our walking. When a washing machine came, it extended our activity of the hand of washing and cleaning clothes. So AI is an extension of a neural activity, or a conceptual activity, or a visualization activity. It's going to assist us to do those works even better in future. But coming back to the reality of life, that we've been a consumptive society, and in the last 30 or 40 years, the consumption levels of human beings have tremendously shot up. And we all know climate change is a reality, and our rivers are polluted, our oceans are polluted, our subsoils are polluted, our food is polluted. Every time we drink from the Amul milk sachet, there will be microplastics in it. Okay, so we are moving into an area where there is a degradation of the planet happening. It's not a concept that doesn't touch us. We live in the comfort of an air conditioner, but it's a reality that Ahmedabad's summer temperature will reach 50 degrees, right? And it may even go beyond it. So sustainability is, while it's a fashionable word, it's a reality. And I think the time is to look at biomimicry. Today I saw a very interesting posting about ants and their intelligence. So some of you may have seen it because it is floating on the social media these days, that when ants pick up a grain of rice, wheat, whatever they pick up, when they take it to their abode under the soil or wherever they stay, they break it into two parts. Can you tell me why? Can you make a guess? So that it doesn't germinate and it remains as food for them. And then the scientists discovered something else, that when they took a spice like dhania or something, they split it up into quarters, not into half. Now scientists don't know why they have broken it into 4 parts. But the interesting commentary is, the scientists are saying The ants know something about grains much more than human beings, right? So the time has to come to look at biomimicry and biomimetics, which is we need to learn from nature. And there are people who are doing it. Another very interesting thing that I saw today, again on the social media, was the Japanese have developed a throwaway plastic, meaning a carry bag, which is made from either some bacterial or some fungi material. And the moment it reaches a water body, it disintegrates and it becomes manure. So these are not science fiction. This will have to enter into our life now. And therefore, it becomes very, very important again for us to look at this as a very important emerging design area. There's a lot of work which is happening. Those of you who are interested, there is a biomimicry institute on the net, and there are people who are scientists who are now advisors to big industrial corporations to understand how to reduce costs in salination plants, how to reduce clogging of arteries. So they look at how nature does it, because nature's laboratory has been working for 3.8 billion years. So if not 3.8 billion years, maybe 2 billion years. So now the time has come to do also for designers, for scientists, for technologists to look at nature as a very important resource. So nature as a model for forms, processes and systems to solve human problems, nature as a mentor for the ecological wisdom on how life works and sustains itself, and nature as a measure using ecological standards to judge the sustainability of our designs. So in design schools, at a very small level, students have started working on it, but we should be having labs which should be doing this kind of work. I don't know if you know that there is a innovator in Ahmedabad. I think he came on Shark Tank. He is developing sanitary napkins with the outer layering of corn, the protective skin around maize corn. And he's been fairly successful at making it, because a lot of the sanitary napkins are made with synthetic materials. So its biodegradation, degradation will take certain amount of time. So there is experimentation happening in these kind of things as well. And so these are areas of research that design needs to look at. So the digital age, AI is going to be of relevance to us. It should help us identify complex patterns in very vast databases, revealing insights which human analysis may also not be able to have. Simulations. A lot of simulations are possible. So machine learning has provided us models to simulate complex scenarios, predicting outcomes and optimizing solutions. Technologists are doing a lot of simulations. Automobile industries are doing a lot of simulations. So machine learning and AI can help us tremendously in it. And co-design. Till date in design, we are talking of co-design. There are two levels of co-design. One is you co-design with your customers. You co-design with your users. You co-design with the people. So it is participatory design. It's co-design. You also co-design with other disciplines together. But here now we are saying we will have to co-design with AI, meaning AI will have to be our assistant, not we assistants of AI, but AI will have to assist us. And how do we use it? And these are areas, also important areas of research. That so, like for example, at our design school, now we have, from this year we've introduced, earlier we were always worried that students are not doing the work and they are using AI resources to give us the design solution. Now we put it into the assignment. You have to use this software, and then you have to tell us the methodology you used and the process you used. So we tell them to articulate what was done, because it's important to engage in the field. I'll give you another instance, that how students sometimes take shortcuts, and you have to be, as teachers, very vigilant. We have a course called History of Objects, and we decided to take play as a theme, and in that we took board games. So we told the students that you have to look at 3 generations of people and look at the board games, because in a typical Indian family, you stay with your parents and you stay with your grandparents. So you have that. And after a week, when we asked the students to submit the work, 44 charts looked the same, because they all had used those 2 AI software that they were familiar with. And not only were they the same in the look, they were the same in the output. So the teachers, because we are a little more intelligent than them in some things, so we caught them. So then we told them, now you have to do an engagement with your grandparents. Ask them what board games they played in which period of their life. Then you have to do this exercise with your parents. And then you have to do a video documentation of this conversation. And then you have to pull out from your cupboard the board games that you have played, or the digital board games that you have played. And then you bring it there. And then, of course, the work that they do is fed into the computer. So AI tools will anyway pick it up and build it into other knowledge. So I think my time is also close to up. So, suddenly all universities are talking of building a good research ecosystem. I'm sorry for the words repeating there. And this is an image that we've taken from IIT Madras's, because they have a very good research ecosystem there. And the government of India is now putting in tremendous amount of money into research, and it's become a national mandate that the country has to generate new knowledge, new research, more patents, more papers, more processes, and more scholarly output. And I think the government has also got schemes for research where public-private partnership they are also initiating. And universities are making it mandatory for not just teachers to do research, but students to do research. So now, for example, we have UG research cells in most of the universities. So the way to, I don't need to tell you this, because I think most of you here are practitioners and not educators, meaning you're not academics. Most of you are practitioners. So if you're an academic, then you know what is the kind of support a university would give. But I would not like to talk so much about it, but I would talk about what should universities facilitate teachers and students with. So one, there has to be contextual learning in the field, as I mentioned, at home with grandparents, with parents, with their own thing. Second is there has to be tinkering labs. You have to tinker. There doesn't have to be a goal there. Just जैने गुजराती में कहते जाके मचड़ो, करो कुछ, उसको तोड़ो, फोड़ो, खोलो. वो जो हमारी एक एटीट्यूड नहीं है, बिकॉज हम हर चीज़ बहुत संभाल के रखना चाहते हैं, ये tinkering labs and tinkering studios need to be encouraged. Even at homes, we have to encourage children to do it. Another very important area is traditional wisdom, because there are many systems, like if you look at architecture, I'm just giving you an example. Ahmedabad has an interesting system of tanka, that is all the rainwater which was harvested. And they had built very interesting system where you had almost good distilled water below your house. These are all systems which we have done away with. So traditional wisdom, alternate knowledge systems we need to look into, because lupt ho rahi hai, chali ja rahi hai. The information is no longer will be available. So that needs to be also researched. And then of course all the important capstone projects, whether research through practice or research through scholarship, needs to be looked at. So your pathway could be practice based, your pathway could be traditional theory driven, or it could be industry linked. So we have to create an ecosystem now for research and innovation. That is important. And thank you.